Really quickly, guys, before the video gets started, I just wanted to let you know, for those of you that don't know, that I do have a second channel called Gaming Logically, where I do some stuff with video games. Mostly at the moment, it is going to be NBA 2K20 stuff, obviously because the game is just released. It'll be rebuilds, my team stuff, my player stuff, as well as I will be streaming on Twitch under the same name, Gaming Logically, and I will be putting up some stream highlights there and making some videos there as well. Same thing, my team, rebuild, stuff like that. I've been doing this every single day since the game released, and some of you guys have even showed up, and I really appreciate that. Just want to let you know about that really quickly before the video gets started. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today's video is a continuation of my NBA season preview series for the 2019-20 NBA season, and this one is about the Washington Wizards. The Wizards went 32-50 last year, and there really weren't that many positive things to take from the season, especially with John Wall going out with an Achilles injury before it even started, with the exception of the fact that Bradley Beal established himself as a legitimate NBA superstar and a building block for this team moving forward, either on the court or as a trade asset. But even with that, they began chipping off important pieces of their team like Otto Porter Jr., and they're just really kind of in a weird spot, knowing that Beal is so important to them and a potential really valuable trade piece, but just not really having a ton of direction for their team going into this season. But first, let's review their offseason, and we'll begin with their first round draft pick, Rui Hachimura. And I, like many people at the time that the pick was made, were a little bit confused about why the Wizards selected him so high. And certainly there were other players that I would have had them take before they selected Hachimura, but since the draft I've kind of taken a step back, and I'm just kind of in wait and see mode on him. He could very well turn out to be a good 3-4 combo scorer, gets a little bit stronger, gets better as a defender, provides a lot of versatility, and has a really good inside-out game. It's very possible that that ends up being the case, but it's also possible that he just becomes either a rotation player or potentially a complete bust. So I'm just kind of in wait and see mode for him, even though my reaction initially wasn't that great. Next up in terms of additions is another draft pick, and this is Admiral Schofield, and I'm going to talk about him a little bit later, so I don't want to spoil it too much, but you should know that if I'm talking about him at any length, even though he's a second round pick, I do like him as a player because I haven't really talked about second round picks to this point in any of the season previews. So he's going to be a good 3-and-D player for them in my opinion, but again, I'll talk more about him later. And then next up in terms of additions is a couple of kind of weird situations in terms of salary dumps. They got Isaac Bonga, Mo Wagner from the Lakers when they were trying to get rid of salary cap space, and then they got Davis Bertans from the Spurs when they were trying to dump space to sign Marcus Morris. I'm not 100% certain that any of those players are really going to be a huge impact player for them this coming season. Bertans will be a good shooter, and then the two young guys could potentially be something long-term, most specifically Wagner more so than Bonga. But again, in terms of additions for this upcoming season, they're really not that big of a deal. And then last up in terms of additions is Isaiah Thomas. And I'm kind of past the point where I think that any kind of comeback, or I'm kind of hoping for anything significant in the NBA at this point for Isaiah Thomas. I've moved past that. However, I do think that this is a situation in Washington that if it is going to happen for him, this would be a good situation for him to have the kind of comeback that some people have been expecting from him over the last couple of years. So he should be a good scorer for them, potentially in a 6-man or maybe even starting role, and maybe build up some of his value again in the NBA with the Wizards. Moving on now to subtractions, and there are a couple of ones here for the Wizards. The first one is Trevor Ariza, and it was kind of weird that he even joined the Wizards in the first place after leaving the Suns and how that whole situation went down, because it just didn't seem like their interest aligned. Ariza has been on competing Houston teams for the last couple of seasons, and then signed the big deal with Phoenix in the offseason, and then moved on to another team in Washington that wasn't really going anywhere at the time that they traded for him. I understand that they still had some opportunity to potentially make the playoffs, but it was still just weird that he was so interested in going there. They're going to miss his 3-and-D presence, his ability to shoot, his ability to defend, but they probably have other guys that they want to kind of prioritize in that role anyway. Next up is Jabari Parker, who they got in the Otto Porter Jr. trade from Chicago, and he was actually kind of good for them, surprisingly, at times when he was there just as a scorer, as a combo forward kind of player. But again, not hugely significant that he's leaving them because they do have someone like Hachimura that they would want to prioritize anyway, and Parker could have potentially just gotten in the way of his development. And then next up are two players that I'm actually pretty surprised that the Wizards decided to let walk. The first is Thomas Satoransky, who ended up going to Chicago to play for the Bulls, got a relatively large contract there. He's been a solid, steadying point guard presence, specifically last year and at other times in which John Wall has gone down with injuries. He's a more team-oriented player, moves the ball around, can shoot it a little bit, is having a really good World Cup actually for the Czech Republic at the moment. And I was, again, just a little bit surprised given his youth, given his productivity with this team. And the fact that they let Parker and Bobby Portis walk and basically just got absolutely nothing long-term for Otto Porter Jr. is really strange to me. I thought that Portis could have been a pretty good long-term option for them at the 4 as a guy that can shoot a little bit, can score a little bit, okay defender. Obviously they have Hachimura now, but just in terms of value to this team, they let a couple of relatively valuable pieces walk for absolutely nothing in the offseason. I'm not really sure that was something that they were really in a position to do. And there are some other subtractions to talk about, some minor ones, but I'm not really going to mention them here. And just overall, in terms of their offseason, like I said, the real disappointment is just that they didn't get value out of Otto Porter Jr. at all, and say what you want about his contract, but in terms of the trade, they really didn't get much back for him because they let these players walk, and that's really the most disappointing thing about their offseason. But if Hachimura ends up working out, then that's going to be the story of this offseason, and nobody will really care about the other guys if he ends up working out the way that it seems like they hope he will. Moving on now to the depth chart, and things really aren't good here at all for Washington outside of a couple of their main players. I've got Ish Smith, Bradley Beal, Troy Brown, Rui Hachimura, and Thomas Bryant. That's not an awful five. Like, Hachimura could be something, Beal's obviously very good, Bryant could be something, Troy Brown, I guess, and then Ish Smith is at least solid. And then off the bench, they've got Isaiah Thomas, Jordan McRae, I guess, CJ Miles, Admiral Schofield, and then Ian Mahinmi. And this is just, it's honestly just not a very talented roster at all, specifically in the backcourt outside of Beal. When your two starting point guard options, obviously we're still waiting on Wall to come back, when your two starting point guard options are Ish Smith and Isaiah Thomas, that's not a very good sign at all. And even in the front court, like, I don't really know what Troy Brown has done to earn a starting spot on the wing in the NBA, but he's just kind of there by default unless CJ Miles has a bounce back season and can shoot pretty well, then maybe he could be relatively important for them. And then you've got two rookies at the 4 spot, and then Mahinmi and Bryant are actually kind of an okay rotation at the 5 spot, just depending on how Bryant plays this upcoming season. But overall, this is just not a very good roster outside of Beal, and then maybe Bryant, and then maybe Hachimura. And obviously, if John Wall comes back at some point during the season and plays well, that changes things, and they have a little bit more talent, specifically in the backcourt where it seems like they're going to need it. But initially, again, it looks like they're going to be relying on Isaiah Thomas for a lot of their scoring in the backcourt outside of Beal. And as I mentioned earlier, I've given up on the whole IT is going to come back and be really good thing, but I do think if there's a situation in which it's going to happen, I think Washington is a good one to at least see. He's going to have plenty of scoring opportunities because they're going to need offense, so he'll be on the floor more than maybe he would have been for the Nuggets, for example, last season, because they already had good guard play and Monty Morris off the bench, so they didn't really need Isaiah Thomas, and then he obviously just wasn't very good as a defender, so they didn't use him very much. So in Washington, at least he should have more opportunity, more responsibility. Whether he takes advantage of that, I'm not sure, but again, just situationally, this should be a pretty good situation for him if he takes advantage of. Moving on now to some players to watch, and the first one is going to be Thomas Bryant, and he's been kind of an intriguing player for the 2 seasons that he's been in the league. Definitely got some more responsibility last year and kind of, I wouldn't say broke out, but at least got people's attention, and they got a new contract this offseason. I'm not 100% certain that he's going to end up being worth all that new money and be a legitimate starting 5 in the league, but for a team like Washington, and again, this is why I was a little bit confused why they didn't make an attempt to bring back some of their kind of younger players. For a team like Washington, it's worth it to at least pay this price and see if Thomas Bryant is going to end up being something significant for you long term, because it's really not that much money at this point, the way the salary cap is, to just kind of wait and see what he's going to be. And if he ends up being something good for them, then that's huge for their, I guess, young core, their rebuild, or whatever you want to call it at this point, just to add any kind of other young promising talent. So I would keep an eye on him as someone that if he can get a little bit stronger, be a little bit more efficient around the rim, work on his 3-point shot, he should be at some point a relatively good 5-man in the NBA. I'm not 100% sure it's going to be starting caliber, but like I said, he has the floor spacing ability, he has the mobility, he has the potential defensively, in addition to obviously scoring around the rim and things like that, to be something good for Washington. Not certain it's going to happen, but just keep an eye on him. And then moving on now to a player that I said I was going to talk about again earlier, and that is Admiral Schofield. And again, if you've been watching my season previews, I really don't talk about second-round picks in these at all, but I really like Admiral Schofield, and I was pretty surprised that he got to the second round, and if I was a Wizards fan, I would be pretty excited about the fact that they did end up getting him. When you look at his college statistics, when you look at his volume and his shooting percentages, he should be a good NBA shooter, and he's so big and so strong and a good athlete that I'd be really surprised if he doesn't end up being a really good 3-4 complementary option, shooter, defender, rotation piece. Like, I don't know if he's necessarily going to become a starting caliber player and a big piece of whatever Washington ends up being in the future, but I do think as a complementary option, he should have a good career in the NBA, simply because he's big, he's strong, he can defend, and he can shoot, and that's really all he's going to be asked to do initially anyway. So I would keep an eye on him and see if he capitalizes on some of the promise that I see in him. Moving on now to expectations, and it's pretty simple. I'm really not going to spend a ton of time on this section. I don't really think that they're going to be a playoff team, and I really don't think many people do either, unless John Wall comes back and is an all-NBA caliber player again, coming off of an Achilles injury at almost 30 years old. I think that's pretty unlikely. In terms of prediction, I've got them at about 22 to 25 wins and a possible Bradley Beal trade as well. I just don't see the talent on this roster. I don't see where the scoring is going to come from outside of Beal. I think he is so good, and I think the only reason that they're going to be in the mid-20s in terms of wins as opposed to maybe the upper teens is just because of him and how good he is. I just don't see it on the rest of this roster. Like I said, unless Wall comes back and is really good, unless Hachimura is really good as a rookie, unless Bryant takes a leap as a starting 5-man for them, I just don't see it on the rest of this roster. And at some point, maybe they'll realize that Bradley Beal's probably not long for Washington and they try and get some value out of him. Maybe dump Wall's contract, get some picks back in return. But that's kind of where I'm at for the Wizards. Definitely not a playoff team between 22 and 25 wins. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Stockford. If you missed any of my previous videos, including any of the other season previews that I have done, then please be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.